Previously on World War I Oversimplified.
We've got the Germans and the Austrians, we've got the French and the British, and we've got a gigantic hole. Who is going to come out on top? I mean, I think we know because, you know, history is a thing, right? But that's what we're going to check out today. World War I Oversimplified Part 2. Welcome back, friends, and a special welcome to all the new friends out there. I'm YoBGS, and yeah, I'm pumped because obviously we know who wins World War I, but what we don't know, or at least what I don't know, is how they're gonna win World War I, and I'm looking forward to Oversimplified filling in some of those gaps for me. The history series on this channel have been amazing so far, so if you want me to check out any other channels, leave a comment down below. I know some people want me to look at Overly Sarcastic Productions. There's like 2 or 3 other channels I recognize a bunch, and if you like what I'm doing, make sure to subscribe because it helps me know that you want to see more of this kind of content. We've got the Austro-Hungary German forces here, and then we've got France and Britain, and the volume might be a little bit loud, so I might have to fix that up here. All right, here we go.
Stuck in a hard stalemate. They knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down. The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominions, and the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really wanted a long, grueling war.
So it really was just a giant war of attrition, I'm noticing, and it's horrible that they're like, oh, they have plenty of men.
From its overseas.
Yeah, because they just own all of this at this point, which
dominions. And the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really wanted a long, grueling war, though, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number 1, new frontiers. When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea. The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany.
But of course they were, because how is Germany going to get supplies? Like, and I ask this question all the time, and a lot of people are really helpful, but it still breaks my brain that, like, with Germany fighting a war on 2 fronts up north, how are they going to get supplies here? This feels like much of a secondary priority.
Colonies in Africa, and particularly in German East Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans.
That is trash, man. Like, look, war is bad enough when it's you and your own people doing your own thing, but what is it, right? There's a reason that don't get other people to fight your battles for you, is a popular saying.
Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war, but after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy.
Okay, so we've got to look at this. Top 10 anime betrayals. Right there. And also I remember from Bill Wirtz's video about Japan, that Japan kind of did their own thing, and then they got a seat at the negotiating table, but the dude was like cropped out of the photo.
Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East. The Ottomans were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia, and then came back and said, whoops, looks like we're at war now.
Come on, you can't just do that.
And said, whoops.
You can't. The area where, like, I feel like I need to be the mediator here. Okay, so you are probably going to end up being a separate country. You are probably going to end up being a separate country, because I feel like war is one of the few things that you can't. You gotta be unified if you're all going to war.
Looks like we're at war now. The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the Ottomans tried to attack Russia in the Caucasus Mountains.
Good to know the more things change, the more they stay the same.
But they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death. Then they crossed miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed. The Ottomans blamed their initial losses on the ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people. Then the Germans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing.
look, man, you can't fault them, right? Meaning, with this oversimplified explanation, you cannot fault these people. If I were enlisted to be a part of a war, I were sent somewhere on my own reconnaissance, and they were like, hey, do this, I'd be like, can I just get drunk? Can I find some hookah? Can I just pretend I'm doing my job?
Do in Afghanistan. All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war.
Good part.
Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks.
But
the Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas, and they used submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania, which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying U.S.
So I saw this somewhere. This is kind of like a historical fun fact. Apparently, the same port that was built to receive the Titanic was the port that launched the Lusitania.
Opinion against
I don't know if that's true or not, but that's one of those like urban legends I heard that I thought was interesting.
Germans. Not to be completely...
What was the plan here? I'm babbling.
59 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying U.S. opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after, and they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War.
Why, and I, this came up briefly in the first one, but why did trench warfare become a thing? Meaning, like, was it a factor of the ability to shoot somebody had evolved much more quickly than the ability to transport people? So, in theory, just posting up was better than, trying... Because I feel like we don't see this in any other war in history where it was literally just a war of inches over the course of years, and, you spent 100,000 guys to get those 5 inches. It's just such an interesting, literal stalemate.
The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea.
It's like being a little bit pregnant.
It's 1916, and a lot is happening. As if they didn't have enough enemies already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around the same time, the only sea battle of the war happened. Both sides had a new powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle, so they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again.
Man, that's so trash. You know what I mean? Just that thought that, millions of people, we'll gladly expend that, people that didn't even sign up to be a part of this conflict, people who just had the misfortune of being born in our colony, shove them out there. But then, I don't know, we got a really fancy boat. I really don't want to hurt my boat.
UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day.
But this is still fighting over that same hole, essentially. So...
It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war, and then they got pounded. The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive.
Thank God. Because there's a reason that these countries that didn't jump into the war didn't jump into the war. And I feel like in large part it has to do with the fact that their military might just wasn't what the other countries were. And so then you hear like, okay, we're going to throw 7 pots and pans, 4 soldiers, and a bullet that we can hit with a hammer into the war, and then they just immediately get taken over. I was expecting the same thing to happen to Greece.
In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory.
They
from
seem
the
to
north.
be making some progress.
The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia to protect Persia's oil fields.
Of course.
And they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad. But the army got sieged in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered. A new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer,
That poor
better known
horse.
as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone was exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first? And the answer
is, Russia. I was about to say, is this where America comes in on horseback and we get to pretend that we did everything? Is this where America pretends they soloed the entire war?
So was Russia. Tired of not eating and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots, there was an uprising in Petrograd complete with riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government, and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany, who now only had to focus on the Western Front. But there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war and was getting super rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans.
Yeah, just like the thumbnail. You gotta flex the muscles, right? The Chad America versus the virgin rest of the world. No.
Germans. So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, wouldn't it be crazy cool if you guys attacked America? But the British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans, and that was the final straw. American troops began shipping out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew their only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With each hit, the Germans were spending more and more resources, while the Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the 5th punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts.
So it was just a 2-year war of attrition. And then because ultimately the Allies got more bulk from, the rest of the world.
Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11th, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. After indescribable suffering and millions dead.
And that's, I talk about this in the World War II thing as well. This is with even a smaller world population than World War II. So as a fraction of what, the world population, that is, it's another one of those where I don't think hardly anybody had a family that wasn't affected by that somehow. It's why in World War II you saw so many young people, at least I think, so many young people signing up was because like, oh, my older brother, oh, my dad, The
world learned its lesson.
War was a part of the family.
For about 20 years.
And it's bonkers too, because like you even see this going as far back as Hamilton. It's an interesting parallel that now I'm watching through Hamilton at the same time, we're doing a lot of the oversimplified stuff, because even Hamilton says like, oh, wouldn't it be great? He tells Aaron Burr, wouldn't it be great if there was a war so we could like prove ourselves? And it's like, dude, no, you don't. You just be passive aggressive at everybody and buy everything up. That's what we do in 20. I'm from the future. That's how wars are won. But okay, so I feel like I've got a grasp on World War I, got a grasp on World War II. Do we go forward in time? Should we check out the Cold War next? Or should we go back in time and check out the Civil War, maybe the American Revolution? Leave a comment down below. I love that this is the random time stamp I picked for the finale of this. leave a comment down below. Let me know where you want to go next. We got a lot of fun stuff planned as well. And again, if you can subscribe, it helps me out more than you know. Honestly, if you subscribe, it'll help pave the way for some original stuff. Maybe I'll tackle some things on my own as well. Take care, my friends, and I will see you. Hopefully not for the next battle.